Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the annual Guilty Flygon Talks About Stuff tier list stream. All the stuff that I think made a considerable impact on me this year in terms of games. Some of these games aren't from this year at all. In fact, some of them are not even really games, but I had to fit Homestuck in somewhere. I mean, how could I not? It took up most of the year. And it's more of a game because it has playable segments than it is an animated. I don't know. It could go into either, but it's based on a video game, so I'm going to call it a game. Because we also have Life is Strange in here, which is basically also like just watching a comic. Anyway. Yeah, this year was pretty crazy. Homestuck took up a lot of the main uploads, but we did a lot on stream, and I played a decent amount of stuff in my own free time. So this is pretty good. Let's get into it. So I don't know if I really want to start with the Jackbox party packs, but it might be for the best because they're like totally different from everything else. But they are an undeniable part of this year for sure. So let's just talk about the Jackbox party packs. So I think the best Jackbox party pack that we have, I think if you like go fully rounded in terms of the games that are in it, is probably Party Pack 7, although I think we played Party Pack 8 a lot more. And it has also, I think, really 3 really good games and like 2 pretty okay games, whereas 7 I think has, what is it? Technically 4 good games and 1 pretty okay game, but we can't really play talking points on stream, so it's a little hard to judge. I feel like they're on a similar level, and I think I'll put them both in A tier for that. I think Party Pack 4 has 1 good game, which is Trivia Murder Party. No, that's this one. This one has Trivia Murder Party 2. But that is like the only game we play from this pack, so I think we're going to put it in C tier. Role Models is okay. The other 3 games, I think, have significant problems. I know there's some people from the streams who really like Push the Button. The other 2 games being Dictionarium and Joke Boat. I know there are some people who really like Push the Button, but I feel like it's weirdly weighted on the side of the imposters, the aliens, at least for new players, which was basically our experience. So while I think probably if we played it all the time, it could be a really good game, I think as it stands, it was kind of a frustrating game that left everybody feeling like, ugh. So I think that's probably the one that ends up in the lowest. I think Jackbox Party Pack 4 does sit here with it, though, because we have Survive the Internet, which is a pretty good game, and Fibbage, which is obviously a good game. But then we also have Monster Seeking Monster, which we like a lot, but really it's not much of a game. And then Bracketeering, which I like the last round of, but that's it. And Civic Doodle, which is literally terrible. So we're kind of not doing too great there. And then Party Pack 3, I think, in the middle of those kind of makes sense because we have TKO, which was, again, a game we played a lot. Trivia Murder Party 1 is good. It's just kind of outclassed by 2. And Gaspionage, I think, is actually quite a good game that is distinct enough from Pole Mine to kind of stand on its own still. The other ones, Faking It, obviously we can't play. And honestly, I don't even remember what the last game in this pack is. What is this orange game on the bottom? I don't know. But anyway, I don't think we ever played it. Oh, maybe it's Drawful 1? Is that what it is? I don't know. But the fact that I can't even remember it is probably pretty decent evidence that we didn't enjoy it a whole lot. So, oops. All right. Speaking of probably didn't enjoy it a whole lot, poor Multiverses, but I have to do it to him. I was really enjoying Multiverses for like the first like couple weeks it was out. Like maybe the first month, let's be generous. I think the way the characters played was pretty fluid for the most part, at least the ones that I liked, which was like Shaggy and Batman. But they had a very aggressive patching strategy, which is also my problem with another game that I really liked last year, which basically led the things I liked about the game to slowly disappear. And just like Marvel Snap, I'm talking about them, they're basically the same problem. Because of these aggressive patches and the introduction of new characters who were obviously just as broken as the original characters were originally, and now they'd been tampered down, right? The new characters and new cards just totally took over everything. So if you didn't buy them, then you were at a huge disadvantage, which is like probably intentional, right? Like, this is a company that wants to make money, but it makes the gameplay experience miserable. And it's so sad because Marvel Snap, up till about Pool 3, which, to explain that briefly, when you first start the game, it's a Marvel card game. You are dumped into the first pool, which is like beginner players, and you get beginner-friendly cards. And the game can get a little boring in there, but for the most part, it's pretty fun. You're fighting a lot of bots, but, so you win a lot. It feels good. And then you get into Pool 2, which is some other cards. Basically, it's just like cards that didn't really want to be in Pool 1, but aren't really strong enough to hold their own in Pool 3, which is like everything else. And this part feels like the biggest, like, just get through it as fast as you can sort of thing. There's very little cards in there, and now you're starting to fight more players. It still feels pretty fair because everybody has the same cards. And then you break into Pool 3 and suddenly people have these hugely powerful, like perfectly constructed decks. And you don't have any of those cards. And it is a terrible experience. And you know what? I got through that experience. A lot of people didn't, for understandable reasons, I would say. But I did get through that experience, and I got almost every card in the game. At one point, and I didn't spend any money other than on the like season passes, and I was actually enjoying myself a good amount. Everything came to an end with the October season. Literally, it took that long. Like, there were other problems in the game before. Like, for a while, Darkhawk used to run rampant, which was just a card that was pretty cheap and had really high power, but there were counters to it, right? In the October season, they introduced a card, they introduced Loki, which is a card that basically copies your opponent's hand of cards, but reduces their cost by 1, which basically means they have exactly what you do, except they can outpace you. And at the same time, they nerfed the strategies that would probably deal with him the most. And then, in their attempts to try to rebalance him, they hit a bunch of cards that were fun in other archetypes before he came out, and now they were worthless in those archetypes, and Loki was still good. In that season as well, they introduced 2 more cards that were terrible for the meta. One was Mobius M. Mobius, which, as far as I understand, is a character from the Loki show, which basically stopped you from having any cost reduction. Oh, it's supposed to be like, okay, so this is supposed to be the counter to Loki. But it didn't really effectively do that, because you could still play Loki and get your opponent's cards and then just set up your board better beforehand, so it's still a worthy play. And Mobius killed a bunch of other decks, including a lot of decks I really liked. For those of you who do play this game, or at least did, I was a huge fan of the Sarah Surfer decks, which would use Sarah to discount cards, and then Silver Surfer to power up a bunch of lower power cards. That was like my mainstay deck. And the other one I really liked was Mr. Negative, which essentially inverted the cost and power of your cards, so you got really high power cards for low cost. But you had to like pull off this combo to make it work. Mobius completely murdered that deck. It was literally impossible to play anymore. And then they released another card called Eliath, which on turn 6 just basically invalidated everything you did as the opponent. By just like destroying everything on your opponent's side of the board at that one location, but it was pretty easy to just lock the game down to that one location and just blow everything up, and it made the game horrible. And they all, I can't even believe it. Werewolf by Night also released in that season, which was a card that just got to hugely insane power levels for no good reason. So it felt like, even though I got most of those cards because they all seemed to be really good, and I had saved up some currency from the last few times not being that great, I just wasn't having fun anymore. And I stuck it out through November just to like see if they could fix it. And they tried, but in the meantime, they also destroyed a bunch of other cards to try to rein in these new ones, and I was just tired of it. And this is my first month free of Marvel Snap, and it will not be the only month free, I promise. I don't think I'm ever going back, which is sad because I played it for a lot of this year and genuinely enjoyed quite a bit of it. But I just think in the current state it's in, it has lost the things that I liked about it. So it's kind of over for me. It's sad. It's like, to make a comparison that some of my Nintendo nerd fans probably would get more aptly. When Smash Bros. Ultimate came out, Pichu was a really good character. And I really thought that was funny. Like, the joke character ended up being really good in the hands of technical players. And I actually started playing Pichu, and it was actually a lot of fun. But then they were like, well, Pichu's supposed to be a joke character, so we're going to basically tone down Pichu until Pichu can't really be played anymore. And that whole era of, like, Pichu is gone now. You can't play Pichu anymore in that way. So it feels like that. Multiverses is almost the exact same. As a Batman main, the character that they seem to change the most, it was terrible. Every time they drop a patch, the character would completely change, and you'd have to relearn the strategies. Sometimes Batman would be all about throwing the batarangs and then grappling in, and like it was like a zoner thing. And then the next patch would be all about like close combat because the batarang was kind of worthless. Then they'd bring the batarang back, and then they'd nerf it, and they just didn't have any idea what they wanted to do with that character. And I felt like it was a pretty big problem across the board. I give Marvel Snap a little bit more than I do Multiverses because at least it's still going. Like, they didn't literally shut it down. And I can see why some people would still have fun with it. If your deck that you like the most is still going, then thumbs up, you still get to play the game. But I think they've fundamentally changed it to the point where I can't play it anymore. Sad. Your Turn to Die's alternate route. I gotta put it in D. Now, to be fair, the actual content of the route isn't really D tier worthy. The problem is, I just thought it would be way more different. Really, there was like, I could probably have looked up the wiki of the differences, and there would have been like a list of different lines. And I probably could have just done that instead of playing through the entire game again, or at least the entire back half of the game again. It's a little crazy that the deaths, or the swapping out two characters dying instead of two other characters doesn't change more, but really it didn't that much. Like, we had like, the most we had was one character got a little bit more of an arc, but it still didn't go anywhere because it needed to be within the bounds of the story that was going to continue into the next chapter. So it's a little bit of a problem with making alternate routes. It really got me thinking about if alternate routes have ever been good in a game. And some people are like, well, no, there are cases where they are. And that's probably true, but I don't know. It almost killed my enjoyment of Your Turn to Die, which I think is a lovely experience that you should experience if you like Danganronpa. Don't take this as a as a sign that it's bad, because really it was just like, you don't play the alternate route of what you've chosen. Just stick with what you've chosen. And they'll be better off that way. Life is Strange. Okay, I kind of cheated for this one because I didn't actually play Life is Strange. I went back and forth on whether I wanted to include this or not, because it's like 80% of why you're playing this game is for the story. It is basically like a Telltale game, right? Except you don't actually make meaningful choices, basically. Like, you can, but for the most part, there's like an obvious right choice, and then you can choose to continue making the wrong choice if you want to, until like the end of the game where you have the big final choice, and even then, one of the endings is very contrived if you choose the choice the developers didn't intend you to. So why even offer choices at all? This was another contributor to the why do games even have choices if they don't actually have them. So don't take my word as gospel on this, because again, I didn't actually play it, even though I watched someone, like, I didn't even watch an edited video of it. Like, I watched the entire game basically. And because it's so story driven and that's like the main draw, I feel like I've basically seen it. I don't know. I'll put it in C. There's some interesting ideas, but there's so many obvious cases where, like, the story could have went in a slightly different direction and been way better. And they just don't take those opportunities. There's so many, like, weird things where they introduce a concept and then they're like, oh, but don't think about that until later, even though it could definitely solve the problem that's happening right now. I didn't have as much of a problem with the blue-haired girl here, Chloe's character, as a lot of people seem to. She is annoying, but, like, not to an unbelievable degree. I've definitely dealt with more annoying characters and stuff like Danganronpa, so maybe I'm just numb to it. Honestly, neither of these two are particularly strong characters, but Chloe's a way stronger character than Max is, who's the main character. So I kind of couldn't hate her, you know? Like, at least she's, like, drawing my attention. I don't know. Anyway, that's that. Murder of Sonic the Hedgehog. I mean, this was just a little fun game. I think for that, it's probably an A tier. Definitely not going for the best of the year status or anything for me, but it was a fun little adventure with the Sonic crew in, like, a different light that you normally see them. Tails got to do something? Wow. It almost felt like a two-parter episode of some Sonic cartoon that I'd never watched before. And you know what? That's fine by me. I love that. Town of Salem 2. Oh boy. I'm gonna gripe again. Here we go. Town of Salem 2 is just fine. If you've watched these videos before, I've definitely put Town of Salem 1 on a list before. And I might have put it in B tier, honestly, as well. Because the game is, like, it's entirely balanced around who you're playing with, right? Because it's another one of these social deduction games, kind of like Among Us, but in a different way. And it sort of depends if people are willing to actually play the game properly or if they know how to do that. And if they're, like, super try-harding, sometimes it can be a little bit worthless of a playtime as well. Sometimes you just die immediately, and then your playtime is basically worthless. But I can't help but prefer the first game still. Something that Town of Salem did, or Town of Salem 2 did, which I think was smart, but at the same time kind of ruined it for me specifically, who's been playing Town of Salem 1 since I was like 12, is they removed a faction. In Town of Salem 1, for a long time, it was just Mafia versus Town versus any other random evils that happened to be there, like witches or werewolves or whatever. But then, like, I don't know, a while ago, quite a while, they introduced a third group, which is the Coven. And the Coven was like, oh, the witch got an upgrade, and you got all of these other people who were kind of like the Mafia, but now they were another separate faction. So you had two evil factions feuding with each other while also trying to not get destroyed by the town, which I thought was interesting, because then you're not literally just one bigger team versus one smaller team, but that has more information. It's two smaller teams with more information trying to subvert the other, while also avoiding the one bigger team from wiping each other out. And obviously that means that one of the smaller teams can convince the town to destroy the Mafia or whatever by pretending to be part of the town. It was a very interesting dynamic between the three, and it really reignited my enjoyment of the game. They sort of do this in Town of Salem 2, but they've removed the Mafia, which was honestly my favorite list of roles, so screw me, I guess. They have the Town and the Coven, and then a lot of the random neutrals have gained the ability to become, like, teammates, like serial killers now can like work together a little bit more. They get a little bit of additional power. And what was the other one? Oh, the big one, which is the, what are they called? Death, pestilence, war, famine. What are they called? The Horsemen of the Apocalypse, which is like a new team that's like 4 super powerful people who have to like slowly gain powers. I don't like them. I just don't like them at all. They either feel like way too strong or completely worthless. And at that point, why even have them? And really, what this boils down to at the end of it is whether you prefer a social deduction game to focus entirely on the sort of deceit angle, where like it's all about social engineering. It's about convincing the other players of your role and then being able to manipulate them if you're evil, or if you prefer it to be about playing the role good, which is more what Town of Salem 2 is, where as long as you're playing your role to the utmost of your ability, there's really not too much that the evils can do. Or conversely, if the situation is more on the side of the evils to begin with, if they're playing their roles well, there's really nothing Town can do. And I know that sounds like, well, one of those is clearly more interesting than the other. They are pretty balanced in terms of like both being interesting. Because obviously at the start of the game, you're not in a situation where either team is automatically winning. But I prefer the latter, or the former rather, where it's more social deduction based, and Town of Salem 2 is more role based, I would think, at least. Because a lot of the roles have gained a lot of like superpowers that they didn't have before. So now the serial killer doesn't need to like pretend to be part of the town. They can just like lay low, which was a strategy you could do before, but it would screw you over in the end. And they removed roles like the survivor, which were completely neutral, and basically you had to gain their favor by befriending them or being or convincing them in one way or another, being funny even. And that's gone now. So I don't know. It's good, and it's obviously just as good as the old one, if not better. It's just not quite for me. Oh, man. Are you ready to hear that exact same thing like 4 more times? Apparently this year was not good for me when it came to gaming. Fire Emblem Engage. I'm putting it in C tier. If you don't know anything about Fire Emblem Engage, let me introduce it to you. So the previous Fire Emblem game we had was Fire Emblem Three Houses, and I'm sure you heard of that one if you know anything about Fire Emblem, because it was a really big deal, because everybody played it that like had any mild interest in it, and it was very enjoyable. There are some things about it I don't necessarily like in retrospect, like some of the maps are really boring, and a lot of the plot points feel like they don't get really adequately concluded, but at least there were plot points. Which brings us to Engage, which is basically the opposite of everything that was done in Three Houses. The only thing that it retains is like you have a avatar player character that you can customize a little bit, and you have like a home base that you can visit to do supports in. Like the Italians are gone, which is kind of understandable, but still feels a little crazy after they were like fairly popular in Three Houses, I think. At least I like them. The more dynamic story is gone. We've got a very bare bones story. The like world building is gone. The world is very bland. I don't know. It feels really weird, and I don't like it. And that's pretty much all I can say. There are some people who like this game. I didn't find a single character in this game that I thought was interesting, except for Yunaka, and yeah, that's it. It feels like Yunaka was like, what's it called? Eyedropper tooled into like a game that she doesn't belong in sometimes, with a lot more subtlety and depth. Anyway, Zelda the Minish Cap. Allow me to recite my line of the video. It's good, but it's not for me. I don't think it's a C tier, though. I think it's B tier. I actually like 2D Zeldas, more than 3D Zeldas sometimes, My favorite Zelda game of all time is A Link Between Worlds, and I don't like A Link to the Past all that much, personally. But Minish Cap is so obscure. And I don't mean like people don't know about it, because they don't, so it's true in that sense. But I mean in like, sometimes it'll be like, okay, let's go to the next temple. And it's like, well, I need an item. It's like, okay, find it. Where is it? I don't know. I'm trying to remember the specific example I used, because I know this came up like in a stream around the beginning of the year. I'll never find it. But someone was talking about Minish Cap, because I was saying I'm playing Minish Cap now that it's come to the Switch GBA thing. And I do believe I spent like a good 2 hours one day just searching for this item, because I'm pretty stubborn when it comes to looking stuff up, especially in Zelda games, because half the fun is like figuring stuff out, right? It's basically a puzzle game half the time. There was one section where you need to go into the town, like the main town. You have to become a Minish to do this little quest thing in order to get an item from like a shoemaker, I think, like the Pegasus boots, I'm assuming. I don't know if that's true or not. And I could not figure that out for so long because I didn't know where the boots were. I didn't even know that was like a shoe store. And you need to do like 3 other steps before you can activate it. I played this game at the beginning of the year, so unfortunately my memory about this annoyance that has stuck with me is really only the emotion of annoyance. But otherwise it'd be an A tier, because it is a good game, and I think overall the gimmick of turning tiny and fighting normal enemies sometimes as like huge towering bosses is very fun. But there are definitely some drawbacks. It's like if you were to play Zelda 1 nowadays without any knowledge of what was going on, which for some people is great, but it's not for me. See the line, Bart? It's not for me. Alright, I'm going to leave Homestuck to the end, because it's only fair to keep you in suspense, right? The Indigo Disc. Don't buy it. This is like the only time I've ever thought, man, I shouldn't have bought that on a Pokemon product. And that's saying something. A lot of people hated Sword and Shield. A lot of people hated Ultra Sun and Moon. A lot of people hated the first DLC for Sword and Shield. A lot of people hated Scarlet and Violet. I honestly enjoyed all of those fine. I think the Isle of Armor DLC for Scarlet and Violet, or not Scarlet and Violet, why do they have to be S's? They both start with S. Sword and Shield, the Isle of Armor DLC, which was the first one, I didn't really like at all. But the Crown Tundra was very interesting, and it had a lot of new stuff to do, so I liked it. The Indigo Disc and the Teal Mask. Teal Mask is like the lamest like Pokemon experience I think I've ever had. Is that crazy? Like even more lame than like Generation 6, which is pretty lame when it comes to like characters, world building, new Pokemon, that kind of thing. I genuinely don't think I liked a single thing in Kitakami, except for like the battle theme. I think like the wild battle theme I liked. I didn't even like the main character battle themes or the legendary battle themes that much, and usually that's a slam dunk. But I guess because I had no connection to the Teal Mask DLC at all, because the story I found very shallow and contrived, and the characters sometimes even more so. And the new forms were like okay, but not really anything standout. Nothing I was like, wow, that's awesome. So yeah, Teal Mask is like F tier for me. The Indigo Disc is definitely not as bad. The Terrarium is a very interesting location. I think the new characters are at least intriguing because they're related, at least in some way. I was going to say they're the children, but I don't know about all of that. Like, they could just be, like, cousins or something, some of them. I'm not sure. But the new characters are mostly related to characters from Generation 5, which I think is fun. They've got the whole Generation 5 remixes on the battle themes and stuff. It's cool. The new forms are Chaludon and Hydrapple are both very good, and I think they're really necessary to help out those Pokemon, Duraludon and Applin/Diplin. That said, the story still revolves around Kieran, who I could not care less about. I'm sorry for the people that like him, but in general, he's just a really, like, I really don't want to talk about this more than I have to, but his character arc of going from happy-go-lucky sort of shy kid to, like, villain is so contrived. Because Carmine's like, oh, we can't tell him about the ogre because he could run off and then get himself in danger. So it's like, okay, that is a reason not to tell him for one night. Why do we still continue to not tell him? And then he gets mad at us pretty fairly, but the game doesn't, like, make it seem like it was necessary. You know what I mean? Like, if the ogre was actually a dangerous Pokemon that we are barely containing, then fine, that makes sense. But no, Ogerpon's like a cute little grass baby, and it just bounces around and smiles. So there's, like, literally no reason for us to stop Kieran from seeing the ogre after that first night, when it's just because it's night. And then he comes back and he's all edgy. And it's like, okay, sure. And we don't even really get a character arc for him. What happens is we beat him in the Blueberry League Championship. He goes, wah! And then we take him to the Area Zero final area, and we beat him again. And he's like, I'm useless. And Carmine's like, no, you're not. Help. You did this, now fix it. And he's like, okay. And then he's like totally forgiven. For all the mean-spirited comments. There's not even a thing like, well, it's a start. Now you can start, you know, rebuilding your relationships with all these people. It's like, no, he's forgiven. I could not care less. If we honestly brought, like, Nimona and Penny and Arvin on both of these trips, I probably wouldn't feel so bad about them. It's really just because I don't care about Carmine, Kieran, or what's-her-face. I honestly don't even remember Miss Briar at all. And it's, it makes the story, like, the hugest drag ever. So, yeah. The Sims 4. So the only reason this is on the list is because it went free to play this year. So I thought, hey, I'll give it a chance. I've never played it. I still have The Sims 3 and was playing that whenever I felt like playing The Sims, which is like maybe twice a year for like a week, and then I put it down again. Sims 4 is bad. It's so bad. What can I say? The characters just like don't work. And unlike these other games where I mean like the direction they take the characters doesn't work, I mean literally the characters you put in the game can't interact with the game half the time. Like they can't sit in a certain chair because they're too busy like having a random moodlet that's like, oh, evilly laughing or something. There are like YouTubers like Call Me Kevin, which is the one that got me to try it in the first place essentially, who make it look really fun. But I feel like if you watch those videos, you have gotten a way better experience than you could ever have on your own. Because what he does is he cuts out all the annoying stuff when it doesn't work, essentially. Like, obviously, if it's funny, he'll keep it in. But if it's just, like, the character won't go somewhere, or they're just, like, sleeping on the floor for 5 hours, because even though you sent them to bed, they'd still... Oh, my God. I had a save file where there were children in the house, right? Literally every night, the children would, at some point during the night, see a monster under the bed and run slowly around a hallway to the adult's bedroom, wake them up, slowly bring them all the way back to their bedroom, and then the interaction would break for a bit, so they'd all just stand there staring at the bed for a while. And then they do the little interaction, which is like shooing away the monster. And then the kids would have to calm down from seeing the monster and being anxious, and the adult could go back to bed. But literally every time that happened, basically by the time the interaction was finished, it was time for them to go to school. So it'd be like they'd go to bed at a reasonable time, because I was trying to make sure they didn't like flunk out of school, right? And then this thing would happen at like 1 a.m. They would have to rush over, do that whole shebang. It'd be like 6 a.m. or like 5 a.m. by the time they're finished. They could sleep for 1 more hour. It'd be 6 a.m. It's over. Like, they can't sleep anymore. They have to go to school because they need to eat first, or else they're going to be in an even worse mood. So it just feels like the game has a lot of ideas, but like no follow through to make them work. And that's pretty bad in a Sims game. Like, really bad, in my opinion. And that's not to mention all of the obvious problems, if you've heard anything about this game. Like the fact that there's like 7 billion DLCs, which lock content which was originally free behind paywalls, and even if you pay for the content, half of the time it still doesn't work. And yeah, so as a free-to-play experience, I still don't think it's worth it, which is pretty terrible. I don't think you can get much worse than that. So, okay. Terraria. This is sacrilege, I know. But hear me out, okay? I don't think Terraria is a bad game. I just think if you haven't been playing it for years, it's a bad game. The learning curve for Terraria is immensely steep at this point. The first time I played Terraria was like a long time ago. Oh my god. Okay, so I got the game after watching Peanut Butter Gamer do the hardcore series with it, which, oh boy, those videos are hard to go back to now because so many of those people in them are not so great people, which we know now, but we didn't really know then. Anyway, the game looked really fun, and I played it back then, and you know what? I had a decent time. I think the game up to the Wall of Flesh fight is actually really well balanced and really well done. There's a variety of different classes you can choose to like kind of spec into. You can mix and match a little bit. The early game is probably the most fun part. Like the early game. I don't mean like pre-hard mode. I mean like before the Eye of Cthulhu, where you're just like scrounging around for anything you can get. And if the whole game was like that, which it's impossible really for the whole game to be like that, I would love this game so much. But hard mode introduces a fun new thing called grind for 5 hours to get a singular item you need. And there's 5 of those for the accessory you want. You have to grind for 5 hours to get each of them, and then you get 1 item and you have 5 of those items. So get ready for 25 more grinding sessions. They don't all that take 5 hours. That's like at the maximal probably of how long it'll take if you're unlucky. And I am known for being pretty unlucky when it comes to stuff like that in video games. But like grinding for souls sucks ass. Don't pretend it doesn't. Grinding for hard mode ores sucks ass too, because the ore veins are like way tinier than pre-hard mode ores, and they pretty much get outclassed immediately by post Plantera stuff, and even like the stuff you want to fight Plantera. So it kind of feels like worthless, but like you can't beat the mechanical bosses without it. I mean, you can if you're like really good at the game, but I'm obviously not. But you need like the armor upgrade, but it feels like you're wasting resources because the resources are so hard to find. You can break more altars, but then the world becomes more corrupt and the super hard enemies get everywhere. So then you need better armor, but to get better armor you have to break more altars. And it feels like this should be like a really flowing sort of system. And I feel like it works for some people, and it just does not work for me. I've never been like an MMO guy, and this feels like it's sort of like single player MMO stuff, which I feel like the early parts of Terraria take only the best of that, and post hard mode is the rest. Which is why I never make it past post hard mode. Like, I've never beaten Terraria. I beat like 1 mechanical boss maybe, and then I'm burnt out of the game because there's just so much required of you out of nowhere. That it no longer feels like a fun adventure where you're like acquiring cool stuff. It's more like a doing your taxes so that you can have money to buy a cool thing you need. You know? Don't even get me started on fishing. Anyway, that's it. I think that's my last negative take in the video. Let's talk about some good stuff, okay? Tomodachi Life, it's a B tier. We've been playing this on stream a little bit. We haven't really got to the most fun part yet, which is where people start dating and having kids. But we'll get there soon. And Tomodachi Life, it really depends on the game giving you fun. Like, you can't make fun with the game as much as, like, the game has to kind of give it to you. But when it does give it to you, it is the funniest shit imaginable. So, it's a B tier. It's perfectly in the middle. Even though this tier list only has technically 4 tiers, but you know what I mean. Along with Minish Cap, the other game that really struck my fancy off of the GBA Switch thing was WarioWare on Game Boy Advance. And despite, not being anywhere close to like the level of graphics or whatever of the new WarioWares, it's still a fun time. I liked it a lot. It's decently challenging, but not like annoyingly so, and it's WarioWare. I like it. All right, the 2 big things we've all been waiting for. Zelda Tears of the Kingdom and Homestuck. Tears of the Kingdom was an amazing game. Looking back at it, though, it really will forever be Breath of the Wild 2. This isn't a Majora's Mask situation where it feels like it can really stand on its own. It feels like this is like Breath of the Wild, but better, like tuned up, you know what I mean? To be honest, despite how awesome the vehicle building mechanics are, they did get a little annoying after a while. The weapon combining stuff, really cool. I never gave up on that. That was always fun. The vehicle building, a little less so. And I think that's partially because there's like an auto build rune that I didn't get for like a really long time. And yeah, I don't know. Half of the fun of Breath of the Wild is just wandering around the world and finding random stuff to do, right? That was what Breath of the Wild was known for. It was like continuing on with that Skyrim type feeling of a giant world to explore, and basically anywhere you go, there'll be something going on, whether it's like super good or developed or not. There'll be something, and you can sort of just like remember the best parts of it, And that's what Breath of the Wild is all about. Tears of the Kingdom with the vehicle building kind of introduces a way to skip all that, which feels weird. And while it is like a technical achievement, and there are a lot of cool puzzles they make with it, I don't think I can in good conscience make this the best of the year. I will put it in A tier though. Homestuck. It's Homestuck, baby. All right. Well, actually reviewing my thoughts on Homestuck is pretty hard. Obviously, we're not done yet, so I'm really just going to be considering up to Cascade. That seems like a decent cutoff point for ranking the Homestuck experience that we've got so far. Right now, we're like halfway through less than halfway through Act 6. It's like Act 6, Act 3, but we're only 5,000 out of 8,000 pages in, so those later Act 6 acts are going to be very long. Anyway, Homestuck is impossible to describe. I think the actual plot is pretty straightforward, but the experience of reading that plot in the way that Homestuck puts you through it is impossible to describe. I find the characters mostly charming. There are some ones that I wish would just die and leave the story forever. That's the end of that point. I think that, honestly, I'm pretty shocked by the overall quality of everything. Like, it's a independent webcomic from 2000 whatever, early 2000, well, late 2000s, I guess, early 2010s. And really, there hasn't been a time when things have looked ridiculous without it being intentional. Kind of crazy. Similarly, music, pretty much all good, or at least fitting the scene. The story itself, which is the main part, does suffer somewhat from the format, which is essentially the characters are constantly talking to each other over internet clients, which means they never really get the chance to meet up until like after the point we're talking about in the story, which is a pretty big annoyance, honestly. It'd be really nice if they could actually just go on an adventure together sometimes, but you know what, it's fine. I don't know where to put it. I think it goes into A tier. I wouldn't still be doing it. Well, I would. If it was like really bad, I'd probably still be doing it to laugh at it. But honestly, it's not really bad. It's mostly entertaining. There are some really boring parts, and oh boy, they go on for hours. But once you get out of them, it's easy to be like, wow, this is so cool, and definitely it was worth it. Would I suggest you read it yourself? No. If you have never read it before, I think the best thing you can do is to watch my playthrough. No. The best thing you could do is probably get like a highlight reel from somebody who's read it online and just get the highlights, and you will probably love it way more than I do right now. It's great. Now, choosing the best of the year between all of these candidates is really challenging, actually, because I almost feel like none of them really deserve it. I don't think there's any candidate this time that is like a fully perfect experience in my mind. Whereas in previous years, I feel like it was pretty cut and dry which one stood above the others. I think for me, the best game of the year goes to... This is my simulation of a drum roll. The Jackbox Party Pack 8. What the heck? A Jackbox made it to the best of the year? I wasn't really expecting it either, but you know what? It's true. I think between Wheel of Enormous Proportions, Job, Pole Mine, even Weapons Drawn, and Drawful, this was the game that gave me the most enjoyable experiences out of this whole year. And you know what? Oh, it's getting wholesome. It's partially because of all of you. Aww, says the crowd. So yeah, that's my list. This list is up on Tiermaker, so if you want to do your own list of these things, maybe you just want to rank what I did on the channel that you watched, that's fair. Because I don't expect you to have played all of this stuff that I've played off of the stream or channel, you know what I mean. Then you can do that. And in fact, I'll leave a link in the description for you to give it a try. I would love to know how you feel about these games. I feel like I might get some angry Life is Strange fans. I don't know. I feel like I would think the same thing about Homestuck, but every time I criticize Homestuck, people are like, yeah, you're pretty much right. And I'm like, what? So maybe the most angry people will be the Tears of the Kingdom fans. I don't know. Any maybe Pokemon fans, actually. Sims 4 fans? Any Sims 4 fans that'll get angry? Anyway, thanks for watching this video. If you did enjoy, leave a like, and yeah, tell me how you think about these games in the comments. That's it. You can go now. Okay, bye.